So in this video, we're going to talk about how to make content that makes strangers want to watch your stuff. Why is it that some people can put the same amount of effort into making a video, but nobody watches it? But for others, that video just blows up their entire channel. Now, who am I to talk about this? Yesterday, my channel hit 100,000 subscribers, and in the last 28 days, my channel got 2.3 million views from long-form videos. This number is obviously not inflated with views from YouTube Shorts. I'll be very honest, this video was originally meant to be training material for someone who would want to be my editor, which means that there are not going to be any crazy edits to make sure that I keep you watching to the end. So if you're the kind of person that's looking for a quick dopamine hit on YouTube, this video is not that. It's not for you. And also, since it's training material, it's quite advanced. If you haven't been using Adobe Premiere Pro for the last 6 months, most things that I'll show will probably not make any sense. But if you're serious about making videos, in my style especially, that involves a lot of screen recording footage, I'm going to explain fully how to make this type of content, how to do it fast, and why it works so well. Okay, I'm going to start this off with a quote, that friction is the most powerful force in the universe. And friction is essentially the force of resistance. For example, when you try to slide on asphalt, there's a lot of friction between your feet and the ground, and so you don't slide very far. But if you try to slide on pure ice, there's very little friction, so you slide very far. And so the underlying principle behind all editing is to reduce friction. Make the video more like ice and not like asphalt. Ice, road. More like ice that's very slippery, and less like asphalt that's not slippery, that has a lot of friction. So that's the underlying principle behind all editing. Essentially, our goal is to reduce the mental effort it takes for someone to consume content. And so how do we do that? So for example, things that add friction could be video being too slow and too boring. That adds friction because you want to watch the video less if it's boring. Confusion, if you're confused what the video is about or what you're even watching here, that adds friction because you want to watch the video less. If someone has to listen to 10 minutes of introduction before getting to the actual video that they came for, that adds friction. It makes them less likely to want to continue watching the video because the intro was 10 minutes long. Having to search for where to look on the screen. If you lose where to look and you're unsure, that adds confusion and increases friction. Having to wait too long between two sentences. So if I make very large pauses, this adds friction because it makes the video too slow and too boring. See, it adds friction. You want to watch the video less. What also adds friction is seeing too many overwhelming effects on the screen, aka when the video is over-edited. So we don't want to just throw a bunch of effects in the viewer's face thinking that they're like the video more. That will also add confusion and increase the friction for someone to watch. So how do we reduce friction? What I found works best is that simplicity reduces friction. I want the edit to be as simple as possible. That's the best way to reduce friction. Sometimes people confuse simple with slow and simple with boring, but simple doesn't mean slow or boring. Simple means not confusing. And if the video is not confusing, it means there's less friction for someone to watch that video. So they want to watch the video more. So the underlying principle behind all the things I'm going to talk about next is reducing friction. I want to make the video as easy to watch and consume for someone as possible. I want there to be no friction. I want the video to be more like ice and not like asphalt. Just a frictionless experience. So if these are things that add friction, we can invert them and get things that remove friction. So if we want to avoid the video being too slow and too boring, we make the video not too slow and not boring. We'll talk about how to do that. And instead of confusion, we want no confusion. I know this is some revolutionary information that you're getting here. So essentially, if these are things that we don't want, we can turn them around and get things that we want. Having to listen to 10 minutes of intro becomes make the intro as short as humanly possible. Having to search for where to look on the screen becomes guiding the viewer where to look. Having to wait a long time between sentences becomes no gaps between sentences. Seeing too many overwhelming effects on the screen becomes making the edit very simple. But the most important part of all is reducing friction so that it takes absolutely no effort on the viewer's part to watch the video. It should be as easy as possible for someone to consume the content. So every single thing that you do, every single edit that you make, think about this underlying principle. Does this add friction or reduce friction? Okay, so that's it for the underlying principle. Let's now actually get to editing and explore how to do this in practice. I made this Google Doc for someone who would want to edit a YouTube video for me in my editing style. So I'm going to briefly go over it and give a lot of detailed examples of what I'm looking for. So these are two examples examples of my own videos that I think encompass my editing style pretty well. I'm going to play one of them and I want you to look at the editing. Don't think about what I say in the video, just look at how the video is edited and whether you think it's a lot of friction to watch this video or if you think the video is nice and easy to watch and requires little friction. This is just an example to get a glimpse of what kind of editing style I would be looking for an editor to replicate for my own videos. If you want to play Windows Steam games on macOS that you can't play normally, open up your browser and then type in Whiskey App Mac. It should take you to this link. I'll leave it in the description. This app lets you run Windows on macOS. So click download latest and it'll download. I can then go into my downloads location, which is my desktop, and double click to extract. And we get the Whiskey app. Next, go to your Finder and at the top click Go and Applications. You'll want to drag the Whiskey app from your desktop or from whatever else into your Applications folder. This is how you install apps on Mac. Then double click to open. It says Whiskey is an app downloaded from the internet. Are you sure you want to open it? Yes. Next, it's going to run me through the setup. Okay, so it's essentially a simple tutorial of how to play Windows Steam games on macOS. And my entire goal while making this video was thinking about how could I make it as frictionless as possible for someone to watch this video. Because what it is in reality is just a boring tutorial of how to install an app on Mac and then use it to play games. Anyone could make this tutorial. But my goal was even if someone doesn't use a Mac, even if someone doesn't care about playing Windows Steam games on macOS, I want them to still enjoy the video. It doesn't matter whether they care about this tutorial or not. I want to make them care. I want to make the video so frictionless that even someone who doesn't use macOS would still find this video interesting to watch. Actually, let's go into the analytics of this video and I'm going to try to filter it by operating system. Let's do lifetime of the video. This video has 283,000 views, most of them coming from macOS and iOS, which makes sense because it's a tutorial, but there were still 38,000 people that were watching this on Windows. This is a tutorial for Mac, not for Windows. There were 2,000 people who watched it on Linux. So even though this is a tutorial only meant for people using a Mac, there are still people that watch it on different operating systems without even having a Mac. Of course, they might have a Mac, but I'm very confident that a lot of these people don't even have a Mac. So that's one example. Let's look at this example. Again, I want you to only focus on the editing. Don't think about what I say in the video. See if you find it hard or easy to watch this video. Try to notice whether there's a lot of friction and you're maybe confused. The video is maybe too slow or boring. Do you have to listen to 10 minutes of intro? Well, I already skipped the intro after 28 seconds. Do you have to constantly search for where to look on the screen? Do you have to wait a long time between two sentences? Do you see too many overwhelming effects on the screen? And so on. Essentially, is it a frictionless experience or is it not a frictionless experience? Photo free trial, as one does, and let's download it for Windows. What's the difference between MSI-X and MSI/exe? Let's just go for the first one. Download initiated. While it's downloading, let me explain what I'm going to try to do. I just yoinked one of the thumbnails from one of my previous videos that I made in Photoshop, and so I thought, why not try to recreate this inside of Affinity Photo and see how well it compares to Adobe Photoshop. There are a bunch of different layers, masking, groups, different effects, so I think this will be a decent stress test for Affinity Photo. That's the plan. Oh, it has downloaded. Install Affinity Photo 2. It's the first time I'm seeing this kind of an installer. It's weird. Install. Thanks for downloading. Please enter your Affinity ID and password below to activate your license. What's my password? 7-day trial available. Start free trial. Successful. Continue. Analytics. Would you like to contribute? No. Oh, the lessons window just popped up. Since I haven't watched a single Affinity Photo tutorial, I should probably go through all of these, like the photo basics. Yes, I should. So what is all of this? There are tools on the left, just like in Photoshop. There are a bunch of panels on the right, also just like in Photoshop. And there are a bunch of controls and menus at the top, just like in Photoshop. Feels familiar. Let's go to File, New, and create a new file. Oh, this is definitely a different interface. A YouTube thumbnail is 720p, so 1280 by 720 pixels. Image placement, prefer embedded, prefer linked. No idea what that is. Everything else looks good. Create. Boom. Ooh, and the tools light up nicely. Okay, let's first configure everything and see if all the keyboard shortcuts are at least similar. So in okay, those were the examples of the editing style that I would be looking for my own videos. And the TLDR is, I'm looking for a super simple edit with no stock footage, no motion graphics, no music, no fancy stuff. Essentially, this means simple. Again, simple means not confusing, which means less friction, which is exactly what I want. And adding a bunch of effects, motion graphics, and fancy stuff before learning how to make a good, simple video is simply useless. I want to first get the basic basic foundation right, learn how to make the video simple, and only then, once I know how to do this, I can start piling a bunch of things on top here to make it more je ne sais quoi, to make the video more fancy. But until I learn how to do this, how to make a simple video that's actually good, there's no point in me doing a bunch of these other things because my foundation is completely broken. And with a foundation that looks something like this, it doesn't matter how many effects and fancy things you add on top of it, the video will still be trash because there's no good foundation. So my goal is to first have a super simple edit. And then once I nail this, once I know how to make a stupidly simple video be good, then I can start adding stock footage, motion graphics, music, and other fancy stuff. This was a massive mistake that I fell into when I first started making videos. I tried to make them super fancy, but my foundation, all the things here that make the video easy to watch for someone, that make it more like ice, was lacking. I didn't know how to do this, so I tried to hide everything behind fancy editing, behind cool effects, transitions, but I didn't have the basics right, and that's why nobody watched my videos. Once I started focusing on the basics and ignored everything else, trying to reduce friction, trying to make my videos more like ice and not like asphalt, frictionless, that's when people started watching my videos. Because I started focusing on the basics, on the things that actually matter, and not some fancy things that nobody actually cares about. Okay, so I want a simple edit with no gaps in the audio. This makes the video less boring. I want to zoom in on the important parts of the screen recording, because most of my videos are screen recordings, over 5 frames if the sequence is 30 FPS, and over 10 frames if the sequence is 60 FPS. I'll talk about this later. I don't want to zoom in or out without a reason. If there's no reason to do it, I shouldn't do it. I only try to do hard cuts if a match cut is possible. I'll talk about this later as well. So this is the TLDR. Now for the files, I want someone who edits for me to attach the Premiere Pro project file, not the rendered video, because I will probably make changes, so there's no point in them rendering the video. If any additional files are imported into the project, apart from the original footage, please attach them as well. So next, I'm going to go over how I would want someone to edit audio for my videos, and then I'm going to go over how to edit the video for my videos. So until now, we talked about the what. What do we want to achieve? And now let's talk about how. Let's talk about how to make the audio experience as frictionless as possible. First, I want no breaths. If you noticed, during this whole recording, there wasn't a single breath that you heard. I cut out every single breath because they're simply not necessary. Except this one. 2. No gaps between sentences. Here's an image to illustrate this. I'm going to talk about this more in practice in a second. So here there's one audio clip and another audio clip, and there's a tiny gap in between the sentences. I don't want this because that's just an unnecessary gap that someone has to sit through to wait for the next sentence. Essentially adds friction. So the way I remove gaps is I don't simply cut them out and leave them like this. It still leaves a tiny gap. The way I do it is cut in a little too much on the first clip and a little too much on the second clip, then I join them together and add a cross dissolve, essentially a transition that fades out the first sentence and then fades in the other sentence. This leaves absolutely no gap between sentences or between words. I also do this between words in the middle of a sentence if there's a large gap between them. The other way to do this is like this, by positioning the sentences on different audio tracks and then overlapping them like this. Sometimes I also add a cross dissolve on the end of each of these to make them nicely fade out and fade in. These are not necessary if the audio sounds the same. Next one is related to this one. The ends of sentences slightly overlap each other. As I said, I don't just leave a gap, I slightly overlap the ends of sentences and sometimes the ends of words in the same sentence with each other. Essentially, as one sentence is almost finished, I want the viewer to already hear the beginning of the next sentence. I want there to be no gap. Actually, I want an inverted gap, so that before the last sentence is even finished, they start hearing the beginning of another sentence. Then I want no music, because right now my goal is to nail the simplicity. I don't want nothing else but just to master the basics. I also did most of my videos with music, which was quite a bit of work because I wanted the music to also make the video simpler to watch, but then I decided to do an experiment and remove music and nothing changed. People still like the videos. So if I can remove something and the experience doesn't change, then why keep it in? That's why I decided for now to go with no music. Also right now, I don't want any audio enhancements on the edit, no EQ, normalization, noise removal, etc. because once I receive save the edit, I will enhance the audio myself later, since I may re-record and re-edit some parts of the video. This will be removed later because I want my editor to also do the audio enhancements, but for now I'm keeping it here. So these are the things that I want for my audio. So let's open up Premiere Pro and look at some good and bad examples. Okay, so here I have examples of 2 good and 2 not so good audio clips. Let's first listen to each of them, and then I'll comment on what could be changed for the ones that are not the best. There's not going to be a huge difference, but a very subtle difference, which you'll see later. Okay, so first I want to turn all of these random cut up clips into one single clip. And the way I would do that in Premiere Pro is right click and nest. New compound clip. I'm assuming that means nest. Looks promising. Clip 1, create. Okay, that was the first good example. Here's another good example, but it's edited in a different way. Here, the ends of sentences are overlapped like this, and here they're overlapped like this in a single audio track with a cross dissolve between the end and the beginning of a sentence. Yes, now this becomes a single clip. Wait, was there a keyboard shortcut for this? No. Let's set that to keyboard shortcut N. New compound clip. Why is the keyboard shortcut not available? Never mind. New compound clip will be N. Okay, now that you saw the good examples, let's look at a few bad examples. I'm not by any means saying that these are horrible. Both of these are edited in a way that there are no gaps, but there are small things that still could be improved. So let's take a look at the first one. Okay, let's move to the right a little bit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames. Then I'm going to add 2 more keyframes and change my zoom amount. And then can I double click to move this? No. Transform, crop, dynamic zoom, open effects overlay. Okay, so a couple of things here. This one was really nice, this transition between 2 sentences. Zoom amount, and then what I typically do is try to do just a little more to see if it still works. And if it doesn't work, I move it back. 2 more keyframes and change my zoom amount, and then can I double click to move this? So it still works even if I move it back this much, which means that I can move it back this much. If it still works and I can clearly hear the end of one sentence and the beginning of the other sentence, I can move it back. Now here, even though there's no gap in between these sentences, judging by the waveform, when you're listening to it, there's still a slight pause. So let's listen here. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames. Then I'm going to add 2. See, there was a quite long pause. If I were to do this and cut it this much, and then even cut the beginning of this clip and add a cross dissolve, this would still make sense. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames. And I'm going to add 2 more keyframes, maybe slightly less on this one. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames. Then I'm going to add 2 more keyframes. See? So this removed a big gap. Now, another way I could have done this is moved this down and then shifted this clip over here and then added a cross dissolve on both ends. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames. Then I'm going to add 2 more keyframes and change my zoom amount. And then can I double click to move this? No. Here again, these don't even overlap, so I can just move them like this, and you can clearly see that there's a gap here. Let's listen to how it sounds. Then can I double click to move this? No. So what I can do is move it down here, and instead of leaving it here, I can move it like this, and now there's completely no gap, and all the words still make sense because you can still hear the beginning and the end of every single word. Double click to move this. No. Transform, crop, dynamic zoom, open effects overlay. Yes. So this is how I would change this audio clip. Let's look at the second example. I'm definitely used to seeing different keyframes, or is it just one keyframe for transform? Okay, so this was the letter S. Used to seeing different keyframes, and if there is a letter S at the beginning or the end of a word, it's usually a very long letter. However, if you cut it out in the middle, it still makes complete sense. So I just removed like 2 frames of this audio, and you will still be able to hear the letter S. I'm definitely used to seeing different keyframes, or is it just one keyframe? Even though I cut it in this much, you can still hear the letter. So essentially, when I'm editing my audio, I want to cut in so much so that it doesn't make sense anymore. So right now, you will probably not be able to hear the letter S. I'm used to seeing different keyframes, or is it just I could still hear the letter S, but I want to cut in so much that if I cut even 1 frame more, the word wouldn't make sense. I wouldn't be able to hear the last letter. That's how tight I want the gaps to be in my audio, so that not only there's no gap, but also the end of one sentence overlaps the other sentence. I want them to be super tight. Now, if you cut in too far like this, so now probably you will not be able to hear the letter S. I'm used to seeing different keyframes, or is it just, yeah, the letter S was barely noticeable there. So before you trim it back, try increasing the length length of the cross dissolve like this. Maybe that will bring back the letter. Different keyframes, or is it just didn't work this time, but sometimes it works. So now what I would do is just lengthen this clip a little bit so that I can hear the letter S. But this is the result we have now, and this is how it looked like before. So we cut out this much of the audio and the word still made sense. Let's listen to both of these. So first, how it was before, to seeing different keyframes, or is it just one keyframe for transform? And after, to seeing different keyframes, or is it just one keyframe for all the words still make sense, but this next sentence begins a lot faster than this sentence. So that's what I'm looking to achieve when I'm editing my audio. Absolutely no gaps and ends of sentences overlapping each other. Now, there are a couple more niche scenarios that I'm going to go over. Here's an example from one of my actual videos. Here I'm typing something into my browser search bar and I'm spelling out words that I'm typing. So let's look at how I edited this audio. Where does DaVinci Resolve save projects? You'll notice that I only left out words without the keyboard sounds. I cut out all the gaps in between. This is the edited audio version and this is the unedited audio version here. Let's listen to this one. Where does DaVinci Resolve save projects? It's not bad, but there's still a lot of tiny gaps that could be removed to make it shorter. And if you can give the same information in a shorter amount of time, that's less friction to watch the video. So here's how I would edit this audio clip. Where does the DaVinci Resolve save project. Save projects. Where does DaVinci Resolve save project? Where does DaVinci Resolve save projects? Here all the gaps of me typing are gone and the same exact information is conveyed in a shorter amount of time. Let's do another example. Here's another example of me typing into the search bar. How to record voiceover DaVinci Resolve. And the original audio sounded like this. How to record voiceover DaVinci Resolve. It's not bad, but there are a lot of gaps. So again, if something can be removed and nothing in the video changes because of it, it should be removed. It means it's unnecessary. So here's how I would edit this audio clip. How to record voiceover DaVinci Resolve. How to record voiceover DaVinci Resolve. I still said the exact same thing and it made sense just like before, but now there are no unnecessary gaps in between, which makes the video less boring and thus reduces friction. Let's look at a different example. Sometimes I might want to trim just a little bit of audio, and since most of my videos are in 30 FPS, when I do this, it trims one frame, which cuts off a lot of the audio. Well, it cuts off 1/30th of a second. That's because there are 30 frames in 1 second. But what if you want to do some finer adjustment? You can go here in this hamburger menu next to your sequence and select Show Audio Time Units. This will allow you to trim your audio however much you like. If you zoom in, you'll notice that you can zoom in a lot more. If I zoom in somewhere here, I will start seeing the actual waveform and I can zoom in a lot here. So if there's some audio issue that I need to fix or maybe do a more finer adjustment, I can go in here and choose Show Audio Time Units. That's for trimming audio very precisely. So those are the things that I wanted to show you regarding audio. So to summarize, I like to leave 0 gaps in my audio and also make one end of the sentence overlap with another sentence so that not only there's no gap, but the second sentence starts slightly before the first one ends. Okay, we covered how to edit audio, and now let's talk about video. So how I would edit the video portion of my videos. Once again, this is an editing checklist for an editor that would want to edit a video for me. So first, let's go through these steps one by one, talk about what they are and the philosophy behind them, and then I'll show you some examples and how to do this in practice. So first First things first, once you cut up the audio, nest the clips above the audio. It doesn't matter whether it's a voiceover and then footage on top of it, or whether it was just a recording that you cut up like this. So now the audio here is fixed, there are no gaps in between, there are no repeated sentences or breaths. Now you're left with this. There's a bunch of cut up clips on the top and then audio at the bottom. So what I do then is select all the clips and nest them, so that now this acts just as one clip. Okay, let's continue. So once you cut up the audio and nest the clips above the audio, use keyframes to zoom into important parts of the video. Do not zoom in or out without a reason. This is important because it's underlined. Now, what do I mean by zoom ins and why the hell do I do them? From the video examples I showed you before, you have probably noticed that I do these quick zoom ins in my videos. Let's look at it here. Nevertheless, let's actually explore what's here. Now, I'm aware that there are multiple pages down here where you do different things, like import your footage, then cut up your footage. What's this one? Edit your footage. I'm pretty sure edit is the main one, but what do you do inside of cut? This is fusion, which is like After Effects. This is color grading, which I've heard is very powerful, but I don't typically color grade because most of my videos are just screen recordings. Then there's Fairlight, which I'm assuming has to do with audio, and then there's a rocket ship, which is for the export settings. But let's begin with the media tab. This is where you can import your footage, I assume. So I'm going to import this here. Oh, a few more folders spawned in. Oh, these are folders on my desktop. Why are they here? Anyway, since exploring all of the features so you'll notice that there are a bunch of zoom-ins and screen movements to highlight what I'm talking about in the video. Now, I do zoom-ins not only because that's my editing style, but also because it helps reduce friction for someone watching the video. If they're watching on a phone, seeing a 1440p screen recording at 100% scaling looks like this. See if you can read any text that's on the screen, or see if you can find the mouse cursor. It's actually right here in the middle. So you need to zoom in to make the video watchable. And since most of my videos are screen recordings, part of the reason why I'm zooming in is because seeing the entire screen on a phone can get annoying very quickly. So that's the first way doing zoom-ins reduces friction. Let's look at another way. Zooming in helps guide the viewer's eyes where to look. Most often in screen recording footage, the thing that shows you where to look is the mouse cursor, but your eyes can easily lose where the mouse cursor is when there's a hard cut, when it teleports. For example, see if you don't lose where the mouse cursor is in these two clips. Currently, the mouse cursor is right here. It's going to select this file, and then there's going to be a hard cut. Notice how hard it is to spot the cursor once it teleports. So I recorded a 10-minute clip of how I had to briefly search for it until my eyes got it again. And since there are a lot of hard cuts in my videos, I need another way to somehow guide the viewer's eyes where to look. Most often in screen recording footage, the thing that shows you where to look is the mouse cursor. But your eyes can easily lose where the mouse cursor is when there's a hard cut, when it teleports. That's why it's useful to zoom in to show the viewer where to look. And the third reason doing zoom-ins reduces friction is it adds movement to the video, which makes it more engaging. If it's more engaging, it means it's less boring, and that means there's less friction to watch. So that's why I do zoom-ins. It's not only because that's the editing style I like. Also, don't be afraid to zoom in super up close on small things. How close? I'm talking mouse cursor taking up 25% of the frame close. I'm okay with the video quality looking bad at such a zoom level. So if you want, and it helps reduce friction more, you can zoom in by a lot. It's okay if the video gets pixelated. Now next, let's talk about how to actually do these zoom-ins. So if the sequence is 30 FPS, the zoom in should happen over 5 frames. Most of my videos are 30 FPS, so probably all zoom ins will happen over 5 frames. If the sequence is 60 FPS, the zoom ins should happen over 10 frames. The reason it's different is because I want the zoom in to happen over the same amount of time. And since there are twice more frames in the 60 FPS sequence than in the 30 FPS sequence, to get the same length of the zoom in, I have to zoom in over twice as many frames. Essentially, this is to get consistent zoom in times between different types of videos. So if one video is 60 FPS and another one is 30 FPS, the editing style is completely consistent because the zoom-ins will happen over the same amount of time. Now, to easily move 5 frames in your sequence, so you don't have to do this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this will take ages, you can go into Edit and Preferences. On macOS, it's going to be under Premiere Pro and Preferences. Then under Preferences, select Playback, and here inside of Step Forward/Back Many, choose 5 frames. Now, if I come here at the beginning of my sequence, you can see the frames that it's going to skip here, and I press Shift and the right arrow, it will skip by 5 frames. I use a different keyboard shortcut for this, but I'm going to talk about that later. So if you want to zoom in on something, the first keyframes will go here, and then the next keyframes will go after 5 frames. So the zoom in will happen roughly this fast, depending if the video is playing or not. It's pretty fast. And the gap between these two keyframes is exactly 5 frames, because this is a 30 FPS sequence. Okay, if there's a steady frame for a while, you can add an adjustment layer on top that slowly zooms in or out, or moves up, down, left, or right. This is called the Ken Burns effect. It's when you slowly zoom into a steady frame or an image. This makes it a lot more engaging to look at something that's still, that's not moving. And ideally, you want to always have at least some sort of movement in the video, whether it's the mouse cursor that's moving or that has just moved, or whether it's an image that's slowly zooming in or out. So if there's a place in the video where there's a long, steady frame where nothing is moving, you can go into your project, add a new adjustment layer, then drag it on top here, extend it, then go into the effects panel, look for transform, and under distort, drag transform onto the adjustment layer. And here, if I keyframe the scale from 100 to 110 over the length of this adjustment layer, it's going to slowly zoom into the image, which will make it slightly more engaging to watch. You can create this adjustment layer once and then drag it on top of the clips that are 5 or 10 seconds long, and there's not much happening in those clips. Also, one very important thing is that if I'm doing something right here and not in the center, ideally you'd want to use this adjustment layer to zoom into here and not into the center. So to do that, I would also keyframe the position so that it starts off there, and then at the end, it ends not in the center, but it ends right here in this corner. So now it's going to slowly zoom into this corner and not in the center of the screen. So that's for long clips. All keyframes for zoom-ins are linear. When the zoom-ins happen over such a short amount of time, there's not really that much difference between non-linear and linear keyframes, so I just use linear keyframes. It's a lot easier that way. This is the zoom-in with linear keyframes, and this is the zoom-in with Bezier keyframes. It's pretty much the same thing. The next part that I'm going to talk about is the most difficult, so I'm going to give a lot of examples here. Only do jump cuts if a match cut is possible. A jump cut is essentially this, when there's a hard cut between two clips without any transitions or any zoom-ins. So you can see that between these two clips, my mouse cursor teleports. And a match cut would be something like this. If on the first clip, my eyes were looking on the mouse cursor, and then when the jump cut happens, my eyes would still be looking at the mouse cursor. This is a match cut. I would be looking at the exact same place on the screen between two hard cuts. That's why it's called a match cut. You essentially match where the viewer's eyes were looking in the first clip to the second clip, so that they don't have to move their eyes. This is called a match cut. Here's an example from my actual video. This is a sponsored segment, but here the viewer is looking at the center of the screen because there's something here, and then the next cut that happens, they're going to be looking here, and this is the main subject of this frame where I want them to look. So this is how it looks like. 3% discount on private internet access. That's just $2.03. Your eyes didn't have to change the position on the screen to look at the next thing, to find where to look, because it's a match cut. You were looking here, and when a jump cut happened, you're still looking here, which is where you're supposed to be looking. So essentially doing a match cut just makes a cut more seamless, which reduces friction to watch the video. Also here you might have noticed that I did a Ken Burns effect because this here is slowly zooming in on the screen. Okay, so now you know what a match cut is and what a jump cut is. A jump cut is essentially a hard cut between two clips, and a match cut is also a jump cut, but the main subject on the frame is in the exact same place on the screen between the first clip and the second clip. So let's finish this and then jump into examples. Even when you're doing a zoom in, if possible, put the main subject of the frame in the same spot before and after the zoom in. Essentially think of zoom ins as match cuts. So for example here, when I did this cut into the mouse cursor, I'm going to remove these attributes, then nest both of these clips, and say instead of a jump cut, I wanted to do a zoom in. I would do exactly the same thing over the zoom in. So first I would mark my mouse cursor with these guides, then add 2 keyframes, move 5 frames, and then zoom into the other mouse cursor over here. So now here's how the zoom in looks like. It looked a little weird, but after the zoom in and before the zoom in, you were looking at exactly the same part of the screen, assuming that the mouse cursor was the thing that you were looking at, obviously. So whenever possible, I treat zoom ins as match cuts. And the reason I do that is because the goal is to make the video as easy to watch as possible. In other words, to reduce all friction. No effort should be required, not even moving the eyes to another place of the screen. The goal is to never have the viewer question where they should look. This adds friction. It makes the video more like trying to slide slide on asphalt compared to trying to slide on ice. When watching your edit, try to notice when you're unsure where to look. If you notice that you were searching where to look for even just a small amount of time, that's the part that needs fixing. Okay, I know this was a lot of information here, but let's look at a few examples which will make it a lot easier to nail all of these things down. Also, if you're interested in learning how to apply the things I know about YouTube to your channel and get results like this, I made a template that essentially lays out the entire YouTube blueprint of how to win. By the way, it's free. Most templates like this are just thrown together as an afterthought. This one has gone through many iterations of trimming out the fat to ensure it's as dense with value as possible. But it's only for channels that are serious. It's not some feel-good fluff to passively consume. It's not some magic bullet. It's for people that are serious to do the work. So if you think that's you can download it from the link in the description. Okay, let's look at a few examples of how to do zoom-ins. The green markers here show where zoom-ins are actually very nice, and the red ones are where I would change something. So let's first look through this entire clip, and then I'll comment on each zoom-in. OpenFX overlay, Fusion overlay, annotations. Wait, I can do annotations? What? I can do annotations? How does this look? So where's the annotation? Oh wait, it's like a marker. So if I move my playhead to the marker, it should reveal this? Yes. Oh, so I can just like draw an arrow for myself later, and then when I come back to this marker, I will see this on the screen. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so first, what's wrong here? What's wrong with the zoom in? Here's this segment again. Oh, so I can just like draw an arrow for myself later, and then when I come back to this marker, it shows me coming back to this marker on the timeline with my mouse cursor. However, let's check where the viewer was looking on the screen before the marker. So somewhere here, they're either looking at this arrow here that I just drew on the screen or on my mouse cursor, which would be here. So I'm just going to take the middle. And so when the zoom in happens, since it's very fast, they will still be looking at this part of the screen. And let's look at where the action is after the zoom in happens. So the action is over here, but the viewer's eyes are looking over there, which means that they're now looking at a random place on the screen and they have to find the mouse cursor, they have to find where to look. So instead of doing it like this, the zoom in could be like this, so that the marker that I'm showing is on the exact place where the viewer's eyes are. I'm going to copy these keyframes over to the other keyframes so that the screen doesn't move. And now let's look at the zoom in without the guides. Oh, so I can just like draw an arrow for myself later, and then when I come back to this marker, I will see this on the screen. Now it works a lot better because before the zoom in, your eyes were looking here, and after the zoom in, I teleported what I want you to look at right where you were already looking, which reduces friction since you don't have to search where to look on the screen. When the viewer loses where to look and they're confused and they're trying to find where to look, that's unnecessary effort that can be avoided. So that's why I always try to zoom in into the same place on the screen where they were already looking at. Of course, this isn't always possible, but 90% of time it is possible. Okay, let's mark this green and move on to another clip. Let's first look at this clip in its entirety and then we'll try to enhance it. Okay, so first I want to turn all of these random cut up clips into one single clip. And the way I would do that in Premiere Pro is right click and nest. New compound clip. I'm assuming that means nest. Yes, looks promising. Clip 1. Create. Okay, that was just a short clip. And what I'm going to do while watching this clip is click M on my keyboard, which will add a marker like this, whenever there's a brief moment where I have to search where to look, or whenever I have to move my eyes to a different place on the screen because there was a jump cut. So then I'll know the parts that I can improve. Okay, let's see it. Okay, so first I want to turn all of these random cut up clips into one single clip. And the way I would do that in Premiere Pro is right click and nest. New compound clip. I'm assuming that means nest. Yes, looks promising. Clip 1. Create. Okay, so there were 3 places where I had to search for where to look. Essentially 3 places of friction that I can remove. So the first one was here. Okay, so first I want to turn all of right here, this zoom in. So let's see where the viewer is looking before the zoom in happens. Okay, so first I want to I'm talking about these clips right here, and then I'm going to be highlighting them with my mouse. So most likely the viewer is looking somewhere here on this line here. So I'm going to add a guide like this. I don't really need the vertical guide. So my eyes are somewhere on this line. I'm not 100% sure where I'm looking at because this is just an extract from a video, but I'm assuming it's somewhere here. And let's look at where this line ends up after the zoom in. So now it's here. This is a place where I'm not supposed to be looking at because my mouse cursor is highlighting the clips up there. That means that now I have to search for where to look and move my eyes over there because that's where the action is happening. So instead of zooming in like this, I would have simply zoomed in like this, a little lower. I'm going to duplicate these keyframes over here so that it doesn't move. And now before the zoom in and after the zoom in, I will be looking at the same place. Let's see this. Okay, so first I want to turn all of these random cut up clips. There we go. Now if you were looking here, you didn't have to move your eyes to a different part of the screen to still see the action that's happening. So one of the markers is dealt with and there are two more. So let's explore the second marker. Cut up clips into one single clip. And the way I would do that in Premiere Pro is There, this zoom in was also completely random because my mouse cursor is over there and the viewer, including me, are confused because the zoom in happened to this place of the screen where nothing is happening. So instead of doing this and zooming in over there, I would have probably just removed this zoom in entirely, like so. If you can remove a zoom in and the video totally makes sense, then there's no reason to keep it in. So let's see if it works without this zoom in. Okay, so first I want to turn all of these random cut up clips into one single clip. And the way I would do that in Premiere Pro is right click and nest. Still works perfectly. So I'm also going to select this marker and remove it. Now for the final one. Random cut up clips into one single clip. And the way I would do that in Premiere Pro is right click and nest. New compound. Okay, so in this clip, I was looking somewhere here because that's where the mouse cursor was. That's where the highlighted text is. So my eyes were on this line right here. I'm also going to add a vertical guide. And once the cut happens, that's where my eyes are. And that's where the main subject of the clip is. So in this case, I will have to move my eyes from here to over here. This is a very easy fix. I simply have to move this clip over here where my mouse cursor was in the previous clip. And now this is just a simple match cut. Right click and nest. New compound clip. So you were looking over here and once the cut happens, your eyes are still looking in the same place. And that's also where the main subject of this clip is. So you don't have to search for where to look. The action is happening in the same exact place. Now, since I changed this clip, I probably screwed something up with the other clip. So let's continue watching and see if there are any more problems. New compound clip. I'm assuming that means yep, there is a problem, and that's that this clip also starts over here. So I'm going to add 2 keyframes on the previous clip, cut them out, and then set these as the beginning keyframes of the second clip. This is how it looks like now. New compound clip. I'm assuming that means nest. Yes, looks promising. Clip 1. Create. Also, in a situation like this zoom in was not to show something else on the screen, it was to emphasize what I'm typing here into this name field. When I do a zoom in like this, I typically like to zoom in on the action. So in this case, as I start typing something in, let's see it before. Yes, looks promising. Clip 1. It looks good, but let's do it as the first letter appears. Yes, looks promising. Clip 1. Create. Awesome. Also, in this situation, you'll notice that the zoom in happens into the middle of this box, but the viewer should be looking here where I'm typing in the name. So instead of zooming in just in the center, I would have made the center of the zoom in where they're supposed to look. So they're supposed to look here and not right here in the middle. So I'm going to position my guides here, and after the zoom in, I want the guides to be exactly on the same spot. So like this. Then I'm going to copy these keyframes and paste them over here. And now it's going to zoom in exactly into the place where they're supposed to be looking at. So this will essentially guide their eyes of where they should look, which again is less effort, meaning less friction, meaning that they're more likely to enjoy watching the video. Yes, looks promising. Clip 1. So now it's zoomed in exactly into the spot where they were supposed to be looking. Not into the middle here, but into here where they were supposed to be looking. So now this is how this clip looks like. Okay, so first I want to turn all of these random cut up clips into one single clip. And the way I would do that in Premiere Pro is right click and nest. New compound clip. I'm assuming that means nest. Yes, looks promising. Clip 1. Create. Much less friction. Let's move on to the third example. This is actually a good example. Just watch it and see if you lose track of where to look on the screen. This might not even be a tool. DaVinci Resolve Ripple Edit Tool Toggle. How to use ripple editing in Resolve to edit faster. Oh, you have to switch to the trim edit mode and only then it will let you ripple trim. So now if I move this here, everything to the right moves with it as well. And it should also work on the other side as well. Okay. So all I need to do is to not forget to switch to this tool. Okay, so this was my thinking process behind all of the zoom ins and all of the match cuts. Let's go over each one. This might not even be a tool. DaVinci Resolve. Okay, here I just opened up my browser and moved my mouse cursor over the search bar, which means that the viewer is looking somewhere in this place, somewhere inside of the search bar, because I'm about to type something in there. So the next cut that happens, it's exactly on the horizontal line where the viewer is looking. I could have probably done this for the best effect, since on the first clip they're looking here, and now on the second clip they would be looking at exactly the same place. So let's continue. A tool, DaVinci Resolve Ripple Edit Tool toggle. How to use ripple editing. Here, these were just Google search results, and I could have presented them like this. But if I were to have done this, look at where the viewer is looking in the previous shot. They're probably still looking at this sentence, and most likely they're looking at the last word. So if I did a cut like this, that's where their eyes would be, and that's where I would want them to look next. So that's why I did it like this. I did it in the same horizontal line. Now, the reason I didn't do it like this is because the text would have been cut off, and also a lot of English-speaking viewers read from left to right, which means that when they reach the end of a sentence, their natural habit is to look for another line and move their eyes left. That's why it's not a big problem that my mouse cursor is here, because they will most likely move their eyes to the left since they read from left to right. But it's very important that this wasn't down here or here. It's important that it's on the same eye level as the previous clip. Here and here. Here and here. I could do something like this as well. So before, after, before, after. You're looking at the same place on the screen. Okay, let's continue. To use ripple editing in Resolve to edit faster. Oh, you have to switch to the trim edit mode. Let me actually reset this to how it was before. Use ripple editing in Resolve to edit faster. Oh, you have to switch to... Okay, so here you'll notice that your eyes are probably here because you were reading this, and the next cut that happens, your eyes are very close to this thing. Now, why didn't I do this? I thought of doing this, which would be the correct way of doing a match cut. However, I wanted someone to see this text over here. So once they see my mouse cursor hovering over this tool, I wanted them to read trim edit mode over here. But if I were to do this, it would have worked perfectly fine. Wait, let's actually do this. So now this is how it looks like. Editing in Resolve to edit faster. Oh, you have to switch to the trim edit mode. That was a more seamless match cut right on the mouse cursor. So the mouse cursor before is here and the mouse cursor after is here. If I move it like this is now a perfect match cut if you're looking at the mouse cursor. Let's see it once again. Ripple editing in Resolve to edit faster. Oh, you have to switch to the trim edit mode and only then it will let you ripple trim. Beautiful. Okay, let's go back and see the next one. Oh, you have to switch to the trim edit mode and only then it will let you ripple trim. So now if I move this here, everything to the right moves with it. This zoom in wasn't necessarily a match cut or match zoom, if you will, probably because I couldn't find a way to do it right. However, you'll notice that it's still roughly on this horizontal line. So right now the viewer is looking here, and after the zoom in, they should be looking here, which is pretty much on the same horizontal line. So even if you can't match the perfect position, try to get it at least within the region of where they're looking. That's still a lot less searching and a lot less eye movement compared to if they were looking over here and now they need to look over there. Let's continue. Then it will let you ripple trim. So now if I move this here, everything to the right moves with it as well. And it should also work on the other side as well. Okay. So all I need to do is to not forget to switch to this tool. Okay, so here again, I focused on the mouse cursor and on this line right here, since that's where the movement is happening in this clip. So I'm going to position my guides like so, maybe slightly higher. And in the next cut that happened, I tried to match where the viewer should look. And that's why this clip is like this and not like this, or like this, or even zoomed out like this, because I was looking over there and now I would have to find my mouse cursor. The reason it's like this was because I was looking at this place on the screen, and after a cut or a zoom in happens, I don't have to search for where to look on the screen. For the least friction possible, I want to already be looking at the main subject, since that's the least work for me, for the viewer. I don't have to use effort to search for where to look. My eyes were already here and they're still here on the next clip. Beautiful. There are of course a couple more things. So think of every zoom in as a match cut. Use guides for this. Guides are your best friend. You probably noticed that I use them all the time. I mark where the viewer is most likely looking in the previous clip, and then I try to match the subject of the next frame in the center of those guides. Now the viewer is most likely looking at where the action is happening, or at the thing that you're talking about. Usually it's the mouse cursor or something else moving on the screen. So you always want to match that with the next clip, either when you're doing a hard cut like this or when you're zooming in. It doesn't matter. Treat them both as match cuts. Also, don't be afraid of match cuts. If a match cut is possible, do it. You don't have to zoom in. Both of those work really well. And especially do match cuts if zoom-ins look weird. For example, if a clip is 2 seconds and you have to zoom in and out and pan across the screen 4 times during a 2-second clip, then it's much better to do a match cut, because that many zoom-ins in such a short amount of time will completely overwhelm the viewer. Again, when I'm editing, my rule is that if I can remove a zoom-in and the video still makes complete sense, then there's no need for that zoom-in. So have a reason why you're zooming in. Don't zoom in because it's been a while since you've done it. If it's not needed, don't zoom in. Here are 3 reasons of why I zoom in. I want to literally zoom in so that the thing is bigger on the frame. Like I showed you the phone screenshot before, I literally want something to be bigger on the screen so that it's more visible on a mobile device. The second reason is I want to emphasize something, like a word that I'm typing in. Here it was in this example over here, where the thing is already visible on the screen and I want to emphasize that I'm talking about that thing. Here I want you to emphasize that I'm typing something into the search bar, and this zoom in is purely to focus the viewer on this part of the frame. That's for emphasizing something. And third, I sometimes do a zoom in to hide a hard cut. So when my mouse cursor teleports from one end of the screen into another end of the screen. In those cases, I typically do a match cut. In those cases, I typically do a zoom in or a match cut to make sure that this doesn't happen. See, my cursor is teleporting and you have to follow it with your eyes. There's no movement like this that can guide you where to look. So if the cursor jumps like this, you can just use a zoom in. Next, I try to follow the cursor, not the words that I'm saying. If the cursor moves sooner than you'd like, just go inside the nested sequence and delay the cursor movement. You can do that by freezing a frame. So essentially, I almost always start zooming in as soon as the cursor starts leaving that place. If the cursor leaves too soon and you want to show something for a longer amount of time, you can just double click inside of the nested sequence, then duplicate the clip, freeze this ending here, so now nothing is moving on the screen. This is a frozen frame. And if the mouse cursor started moving here, I'm simply going to add a cut and just delay the mouse movement like this. So now this is completely frozen and the mouse cursor will start moving slightly later. Before it was like this. So it started moving where this marker is, and afterwards the movement starts right here, which means that I can show whatever's on the screen here for slightly longer. Now, as I've done with an example, when you've finished with the edit, it's useful to watch the video again and click M every time you're unsure or you're lost where to look. Then go back to those markers that you add and change something. All of these are an opportunity to reduce friction. And finally, cutting on action is a nice touch. So if you're doing a jump cut, like here, where there's a hard cut, if you can, do it on action. So let's watch this example here. I recommend a mouse with middle click. Holding middle click on the timeline and dragging left, right, up, down lets you move around as fast or as slow as you're moving the mouse. No way. Oh, as you've noticed, the mouse cursor started moving off screen, and that's when I added this cut. I'm pretty sure I even delayed it inside the nested sequence. No, this happened naturally, but there are many times where I delay mouse movement right before the cut happens. So here the mouse cursor starts moving off screen, and that's when the cut happens. So I cut on action. It looks a lot better compared to cutting it like this. So if I freeze this, now the mouse cursor doesn't move, and then the cut happens. For some reason, the video flows a lot nicer if you cut at the end or at the beginning of an action instead of from just a steady frame. So let's look at it now. Down lets you move around as fast or as slow as you're moving the mouse. No way. That was a more boring cut compared to this. Down lets you move around as fast or as slow as you're moving the mouse. No way. Of course, this is just a nice touch and definitely not a requirement for every single cut. Okay, beautiful. I think we covered the video editing portion, and let's move on to speed. So how to save a bunch of time and how to edit fast. Now that we've learned how to reduce friction in the edit, let's talk about how to do this faster, how to edit faster. Because if you're using something like the cut tool and you're cutting clips like this, then switching back to your move tool to select them and delete them, and then you select like this and drag it closer, all of these little maneuvers add to a bunch of extra editing time. It's a lot more efficient to learn how to do something fast first, which takes some effort, but then for every single video that you edit afterwards, that thing that you learned will pay you dividends and save you time. And the more you edit, the more time it will save you. So it's worth learning how to do it fast. But of course, as with everything, let's first explore the philosophy behind editing fast. So in order to edit fast, it's really useful to know a bunch of of keyboard shortcuts. Not only that, it's also useful to remap a bunch of the default keyboard shortcuts to custom keyboard shortcuts because of what I'm going to explain now. So when you're editing a video, you have a keyboard and a mouse to work with. One of your hands is on the mouse, that's a very nice hand, and the other hand is usually on the keyboard. This one's even better. The problem is when you have to press something like Control Enter, for example, you can't press these two keys with the same hand that you have on the keyboard. You have to move this hand from the mouse to your keyboard in order to press this keyboard shortcut. This doesn't seem like that much work, but over many hundreds of hours of editing, this time adds up significantly. So if I can cut down the time it takes for me to press a keyboard shortcut, I essentially multiply the time that I save across all of the videos that I'm going to edit forever from this moment on. So to avoid having to release your mouse hand from the mouse and then move it to the keyboard whenever you want to press a keyboard shortcut, I remap most of my most used keyboard shortcuts to this section of the keyboard, to the left side. Because when I have my left hand on the keyboard and my right hand on the mouse, my left hand naturally sits somewhere here. The hands keep getting better, which now means that if all my most used keyboard shortcuts are in this area, I can just press them with my left hand while letting the right hand do the work with my mouse. So you'll notice that most of the keyboard shortcuts that I'm going to talk about next are on the left side of the keyboard. One more thing is that there are a lot of keyboard shortcuts that you need very frequently, like for example add edit to split a clip like this. They require a modifier key. So by default, I believe it's Control K to add edit. Firstly, it requires two keys, Control and K, and second, these keys are on the opposite sides of the keyboard, which means that in order to press Control K, I would have to hold Control with one hand and press K with my mouse hand. That's not good. So with a lot of these types of keyboard shortcuts that you use very frequently, I recommend getting rid of the modifier key entirely. Setting them to just the letter of your keyboard without any modifier key is going to make it so much more efficient, since you only have to hit one key. So that's also what I've done with a lot of the keyboard shortcuts that I'm going to talk about. Okay, so let's get to how to edit fast. The first keyboard shortcut that I'm going to talk about are actually two keyboard shortcuts. They're the Q and W keys. So what do they do? By the way, the keyboard shortcut to open keyboard shortcut settings in Premiere is Control-Alt-K or Command-Option-K on macOS. So Q is called Ripple Trim Previous Edit to Playhead and W is called Ripple Trim Next Edit to Playhead. That obviously doesn't tell me much. So here's what they do. If you have a clip like this and you hit Q, it's going to remove everything to the left of your playhead and move everything to the right into its place. So now if I hit Q, this part will be removed and everything to the right of my playhead will move to the left. Beautiful. W is the opposite. It does it the opposite way. So if I hit W, it will cut out this part of the clip and move everything to the right into its place. So Q is for trimming the beginning of the clip and W is for trimming the end of the clip and then moving everything to the right into its place. Beautiful. So this is Q and this is W. These are extremely useful when editing audio. I can split my clip here and then instead of adding another split here and then ripple deleting this, I can simply do it with one key, which is Q, which again deleted this part and moved everything to the right into its place. Beautiful. I believe that these two are default in Premiere, so you don't have to remap them. Next is the S key for me, and I have remapped it to add edit. So essentially to split a clip. Instead of having to press Control or Command K to split a clip, I can simply hit S on my keyboard. And what it does is it splits a clip under my playhead. By the way, a very useful setting here is to go into Sequence and select Selection Follows Playhead. If I don't have this selected and move my playhead, you can see that it doesn't select the clip under my playhead. So that clip still stays selected. But if you go into Sequence and Selection Follows Playhead, now wherever you move your playhead, it selects the clip that's underneath, which makes it super easy to split clips this way because you can hover over them and just hit S or whatever the keyboard shortcut for you is for split. Beautiful. The next key for me is the F key, and I have the F key set to backspace or the delete key. Why? Because backspace or delete is on the right side of the keyboard, and every time I want to delete something like a keyframe or a clip, I have to move my hand from my mouse to the keyboard to hit delete or to hit backspace. And there's a lot of deleting stuff when you're editing a video. So in order to avoid this, I can simply hit F and it will delete it. It's called clear in Premiere. So just look for clear over here and simply pick it up and drag it onto the F key. By the way, if you want to remap a shortcut quickly, you can just pick it up and drag it onto any key that you want. Next is the X key, I have the X set to ripple delete. I think by default it's control delete or control backspace, which again are keys on the opposite sides of the keyboard. So for me, X is ripple delete. Once again, you can look here for ripple delete and drag it onto the letter X. What ripple delete does is very similar to the Q and W keys, but essentially if I have a clip in the middle, in order to get rid of it, I would have to first delete it and then pick up another clip with my mouse and drag it like this, or delete the empty space like this. So ripple delete gets rid of this extra step. I can select a clip, click ripple delete, and it immediately removes that clip and also the space that that clip took up. One more important thing is that the Q and W keys will not work if you don't have this A1 or V1 highlighted. So now if I press W or Q, well, Q worked, but it's acting very weird. And also my playhead doesn't select the clips underneath that don't have this A1 selected, and now it selects them. So make sure you toggle the track targeting on before trimming the audio with the Q and W keys. Okay, the next one is the N key. I could probably remap it to something like the B key because it's kind of in the middle of the keyboard, but I have N set to nest. So essentially, in order to add zoom-ins, I always nest the clips that are above my audio. So with a keyboard shortcut, I can select a bunch of clicks, and instead of right-clicking and clicking nest, I can simply select them and enter, and it's nested. I very rarely rename my nested sequences, so N and enter works very fast. Now you might ask, why don't I have my enter key remapped? And that's simply because I haven't found a great way to do it yet. I wish my enter key was the letter C, but I haven't found a good way to remap it. I even tried doing it with AutoHotkey. It's a very powerful app that lets you create a bunch of scripts, but I still couldn't manage to get the enter key working every single time. So I'm still stuck with one important key being on the right side of the keyboard. It's just because I haven't found a good way to remap it. Next up are the 1, 2, and 3 keys, and I essentially have them set to J, K, and L. So shuttle left, shuttle stop, and shuttle right. What J, K, and L keys do is J plays the video backwards, but if you hit it one more time, it plays at double speed, and if you hit it more, it plays even faster. K is essentially the same as hitting this. It toggles play and stop, or it's the same as hitting spacebar, and the L key plays normally, but if you hit it one more time, it plays at double speed, and then one more time plays even faster and faster and faster. But again, they're right here on the keyboard, which means that either I have to move my left hand over here or pick up my mouse hand and move it over to the keyboard. So I've remapped them to 1, 2, and 3. And so essentially, if I want to play the video fast, I just hit the number 3 2 times on my keyboard and it plays at double speed. Now let's talk about a keyboard shortcut with a modifier key, so with Shift. I have Shift 1 and Shift 3 set to the exact same keyboard shortcut as pressing Shift left and Shift right. What pressing Shift left does on the timeline is it skips 5 frames, or however many frames you have set in preferences and playback. This number over here. Step forward, back many frames. I have this set to 5 frames because I do my zoom-ins over 5 frames. So essentially, Shift right and Shift left skips 5 frames. If I come back to the beginning of this video, you can see that Shift right skips 5 frames and Shift left skips 5 frames backwards. So again, I need 2 hands to click Shift left and Shift right, and that's why I remapped Shift 1 to step back many frames units and Shift 3 to step forward many frames units. So now whenever I add 2 keyframes like this, I can click Shift 3 and it automatically jumped 5 frames, and then I can do the zoom in that I want. Now if I didn't like the previous keyframes, I can do Shift 1 and jump back directly to those keyframes and adjust them as well. So this is especially useful for my editing style because I create a bunch of keyframes and almost always the gap between my keyframes is 5 frames. So being able to add them like this and click Shift 3 to move 5 frames instead of clicking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on your keyboard is very useful. Next, this key right here, the tilde key or the little thing here, maximizes a panel. So for example, if I want to maximize the timeline, I can hit that key. And I have a 60% keyboard, which means I have to press a bunch of modifier keys to get to this key, and that's why I have maximize or restore frame under cursor set to the Z key. That's just because it's harder for me to get to this key, but essentially it lets you maximize a panel. Sometimes it's very useful to maximize this panel because you can see all of your keyboards a lot more clearly and you can move them more precisely. However, one thing to note is when you maximize this panel, you will not be able to use the previous keyboard shortcut that I mentioned, Shift 1 and Shift 3, well, now it worked, but usually it doesn't work. So you have to unmaximize it, then select the timeline so it's highlighted, and then it will let you jump like this. Oh, now it doesn't let me do this. Oh, I've just figured it out, I think. If you set keyframes here and then maximize the panel, it will let you jump. However, if you have the timeline selected and just move your mouse over this panel here and then maximize it, it will not let you jump. So essentially you have to have this panel selected before maximizing in order for it to allow jumping back and forward many frames. Okay, this was annoying me for so long. I'm so glad I just randomly figured this out. Next, we have the keyboard shortcut Control-T. Now this one actually came from Photoshop. Essentially, when you have a new file and you have something on a new layer like a painting, you can click Control-T to transform this painting, which means it lets you move it around like this. In Premiere, however, you have to either double click inside here to select this and then you can move it, or you have to click here on this motion word. So if you're doing something here, you first have to go into your effect controls, click on motion, and then it will let you move this clip. But this is a lot of steps with your mouse. So I've set to do this with Control-T, and the keyboard shortcut is called Activate Direct Manipulation in Program Monitor. And now whenever I want to move this, I can click Control-T and it immediately selects the clip, and then I can resize it and move it around inside of the program monitor however I want. So it's essentially useful when you're doing hard cuts. You want to transform without keyframes, and so you can do that. One more important shortcut that I use and that I totally forgot to mention is Control-Shift-F or Command-Shift-F on macOS. What I have this keyboard shortcut set to is add frame hold. It essentially freezes a clip. For example, if I want to delay this clip for a little longer, I can add a cut here, move this to the right for however long I want to delay it, and then add a frame hold on this last little frame, and now this part doesn't move. It's essentially just a frozen frame. And I freeze the frame of different clips very often when I'm editing screen recording footage. So this one is also very useful, so you don't have to right click and choose add frame hold every time that you want to do it. Next are very important keyboard shortcuts if you're using only one monitor to edit your videos. If you're using one monitor, chances are that your panels are stacked like this somewhere. Maybe they're down here, maybe they're over here, and switching them like this with your mouse is also very inefficient. Luckily in Premiere, you can set a keyboard shortcut to immediately switch to those panels no matter where your mouse is or no matter which panel is focused. So for example, I'm going to hit a keyboard shortcut and jump immediately into my project panel while my mouse is over here. Just like so. I can do the same for the effect controls panel and the effects panel. And that keyboard shortcut for me is Shift-Z, Shift-X, and Shift-C. So I have Shift-Z jump to the project panel. It's just called projects. Under application and window, Shift-X to jump to my effect controls panel, and Shift-Z to my effects panel. So for example, whenever I'm in some other panel and I'm editing like this, in order to start adding keyframes, I don't have to look for the effect controls panel. I can hit my keyboard shortcut and immediately start adding keyframes, which is much faster than looking for the panel with your mouse. Also, if you accidentally close the panel or it gets lost somewhere, you can still hit Shift-X, Z, or C, or whatever the keyboard shortcut you choose to set, and it will reopen those panels, which is insanely handy. I found that this took me the longest to get used to out of all the keyboard shortcuts, but once I learned to switch my most used panels with keyboard shortcuts and not with my mouse, my editing speed improved so much. So that's the philosophy behind how I set keyboard shortcuts, and also those are my most used keyboard shortcuts. But the underlying thing that I want you to take away from this is that if you do something in Premiere frequently and it takes you a while to do it, most likely there is a way to do it faster, and not slightly faster, but much faster. And if you figure out how to do that, usually with the help of keyboard shortcuts, it might seem that you're saving only a tiny amount of time each time that you do it, but when you edit videos, you repeat the same actions over and over and over again. So learning something once or setting up a keyboard shortcut once is going to pay you dividends across all of your future edits. And if you do enough of these changes, they're going to add up together. So every single thing that you improve, that you get better at and faster at, is going to add to the pile of time that you save each time that you edit. So those were the things I do to improve my editing speed and do the same amount of work in less time. I hope it was useful.